Me and my crew of the Velvet Underworld channels would really love to hear how things are going on at your place, or you could share it to the comment sections so that we could connect with each other. Uh, we would love to build a community of people who love touching stories about mafia bosses. Now, let's enjoy today's stories, shall we?
He expected to find his blind daughter playing the piano. Instead, the ruthless head of the Chicago syndicate found her pinning a grown woman to the floor, a wooden training knife pressed to the maid's throat. When he drew his weapon, the maid didn't flinch. She simply smiled and whispered a secret that froze his blood. Leonidas Moretti did not believe in accidents. As the undisputed head of the Chicago outfit, operating out of a sprawling, heavily fortified limestone mansion in the city's exclusive Gold Coast neighborhood, Leo's life was dictated by control, surveillance, and calculated violence. He commanded an empire that stretched from the ports of Lake Michigan to the back rooms of the city's highest political offices. But for all his power, there was one thing Leo could not control: the darkness that had stolen his 7-year-old daughter's sight. 3 years ago, on a freezing November night near Lakeshore Drive, a rival faction planted a car bomb intended for Leo. He survived. His wife, Camilla, did not. Their daughter, Lily, who had been strapped into the back seat, survived the blast but suffered severe bilateral trauma to her optic nerves. The top specialists at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, including the renowned Dr. Gregory Harrison, had delivered the crushing verdict: the blindness was permanent. From that day forward, Leo transformed his estate into a golden fortress. He employed an army of heavily armed men, installed military-grade biometric security systems, and subjected anyone who came within 50 feet of his daughter to background checks so thorough they bordered on psychological torture. Lily became a ghost in her own home, wrapped in metaphorical bubble wrap. She spent her days in the east wing of the mansion, learning Braille, listening to classical music, and being trailed by silent, towering bodyguards who frightened her more than they comforted her. Leo loved her fiercely, but his grief and paranoia had turned him into a warden rather than a father. Then came Bella Hayes. Bella was hired through the prestigious Wellington Domestic Staffing Agency, a firm that catered exclusively to billionaires and high-profile executives. On paper, Bella was unremarkable. 32 years old, born in upstate New York, with a degree in early childhood development and a flawless 10-year track record serving prominent families. Her background check, vetted personally by Leo's head of security, Silas Mercer, came back spotless. She had no criminal record, no outstanding debts, and no discernible ties to the criminal underworld. She was quiet, with tired brown eyes, practical clothes, and an unassuming demeanor. When Bella first arrived at the Moretti estate, Leo barely registered her existence. She was just another moving part in the machinery designed to keep his daughter safe. Her primary duty was to assist Lily with her daily routines, guide her through the sprawling mansion, and ensure her immediate environment was perfectly curated and hazard-free. But within weeks, Silas Mercer began reporting subtle changes in Lily. The little girl, who usually spoke in hushed, timid whispers, was laughing again. The heavy, melancholic silence that usually hung over the East Wing was replaced by the sound of rapid footsteps and animated conversations. Bella didn't treat Lily like a piece of fragile porcelain. While the bodyguards hovered anxiously, Bella encouraged Lily to explore. She taught the blind girl how to map the rooms using sound and air currents. She placed small, textured markers under the handrails of the grand staircase. Leo watched them through the mansion's high-definition security cameras. He saw Bella sitting on the floor of the conservatory, blindfolded, playing a game where Lily would throw a soft velvet ball and Bella would try to catch it, using only the sound of its movement. It seemed innocent. It seemed like the kind of progressive childhood therapy that the expensive doctors had recommended. But Leo's instincts, the same instincts that had kept him alive in a world where men routinely ended up at the bottom of the Chicago River, were itching. There was a precision to Bella's movements that the cameras barely caught, the way she shifted her weight when entering a room, the way her eyes flicked to the exits, assessing the sightlines before she ever looked at the furniture. When a rogue firework went off over the lake one evening, rattling the estate's reinforced windows, the bodyguards had flinched. Bella had not. She had instantly placed herself between the window and Lily, dropping her center of gravity in a flawless, textbook defensive stance before calmly resuming her reading. Leo dismissed his suspicions as the lingering side effects of his own trauma. He was a man who saw assassins in the shadows and betrayal in every handshake. Bella was just a maid, he told himself. A highly competent, deeply compassionate maid who was finally bringing life back to his broken daughter. He was content to leave it at that, until the afternoon his entire world was violently upended. It was a rainy Tuesday in early April. Leo was supposed to be across town at a neutral sit-down in a private room at the Drake Hotel. The meeting was with the head of the rival Rossi syndicate to negotiate territorial boundaries involving a lucrative union contract. But the negotiations had deteriorated rapidly. Sensing an ambush, Leo had abruptly walked out, flanked by his enforcers, and ordered his driver to take him straight home. He arrived at the estate 3 hours earlier than scheduled. The rain lashed against the stone exterior of the mansion as he bypassed the main foyer, his mood dark and volatile. He dismissed his security detail at the reinforced steel doors of the private residential wing, craving nothing but a stiff drink and the comforting sound of his daughter playing the grand piano. As he walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the conservatory, he noticed an unsettling silence. There was no piano music. The 2 bodyguards who were normally stationed outside the conservatory doors were missing. Leo's hand instinctively drifted to the Glock 19 holstered at his hip. His heart began to hammer a heavy, warning rhythm against his ribs. Had the Rosses bypassed his security? Had someone gotten inside? He drew his weapon, clicking the safety off with a silent, practiced motion. He moved fluidly, pressing his back against the silk-lined wall, and peered around the heavy mahogany doorframe into the vast, glass-domed conservatory. What he saw stopped the breath in his lungs. The antique furniture had been pushed to the edges of the room, clearing a large space on the Persian rug. Bella was standing in the center of the room. She was not wearing her standard gray uniform. She was dressed in flexible athletic wear, barefoot. And facing her, a few feet away, was 7-year-old Lily. Again, Bella's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. It was a voice Leo had never heard before, stripped of all its usual softness, carrying the hard, resonant edge of a military drill instructor. Lily did not look afraid. Her unseeing eyes were focused straight ahead, her small jaw set in fierce determination. She held a short, blunt wooden stick in her right hand, a replica of a tactical knife. "I can't hear your footsteps," Lily said, her voice trembling slightly with exertion. "You aren't supposed to hear my footsteps, little bird," Bella replied, circling the child with the terrifying, silent grace of a predator. "If they are in your house, they won't make a sound. You don't listen for the shoe on the floor. You listen for the displacement of the air. You listen for the friction of fabric. You feel the change in temperature when a body blocks the draft from the door. Now, ready position." Lily dropped into a wide, perfectly balanced fighting stance. It wasn't the clumsy mimicry of a child. It was a grounded, brutal martial arts posture designed to protect the center line of the body. Leo's mind short-circuited. He stepped fully into the doorway, the gun gripped tightly in his hand, but he was too paralyzed by shock to speak. Suddenly, Bella lunged. She moved with blinding speed, closing the distance between herself and the blind girl in a fraction of a second, her arm sweeping out to grab Lily's shoulder. To Leo's absolute horror and amazement, Lily didn't scream. As Bella's hand made contact, Lily instantly dropped her weight, twisting her small torso to use the adult woman's momentum against her. With shocking precision, Lily brought the wooden training knife up, parrying Bella's arm, and stepped behind the maid's knee, buckling it. Bella went down to the floor with a heavy thud, allowing herself to be taken down. In a flash, Lily was on top of her, pressing the blunt wooden blade directly against the carotid artery of the maid's neck. "Dead," Lily stated, breathing heavily but smiling a triumphant, missing-tooth smile. "Good," Bella said from the floor, not breaking a sweat. "But your grip on the hilt was loose. A real attacker would have stripped that blade from you and used it to—" "What the hell is going on here?" Leo roared, his voice echoing like a gunshot against the glass dome of the conservatory. Lily jumped, dropping the wooden stick and shrinking back, instantly transforming back into a frightened, fragile little girl. "Papa?" she whimpered, turning her sightless eyes toward the sound of his voice. Bella, however, did not panic. She rose from the floor smoothly, dusting off her pants, and turned to face the enraged Mafia boss. She looked at the Glock 19 pointed directly at her chest, and her expression remained entirely neutral. "Step away from my daughter," Leo commanded, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Silas! Get in here!" he shouted over his shoulder. "Silas and his men are unconscious in the security sub-basement," Bella said calmly, her voice echoing in the large room. "I put a mild, fast-acting sedative in their coffee thermos 20 minutes ago. They will wake up with a headache in about an hour." Leo froze. His head of security, a former Navy SEAL, along with 4 heavily armed enforcers, had been neutralized by the Maid. The implications crashed over him like a tidal wave. She was an assassin. The Rossi family had sent her. Or the feds. "Who do you work for?" Leo snarled, stepping into the room, keeping the gun leveled at her head. "Give me one reason I shouldn't put a bullet between your eyes right now." Bella sighed, stepping protectively in front of Lily, shielding the blind girl with her own body. "You can pull that trigger, Mr. Moretti. But if you do, you will be burying the only person in this city who knows exactly who planted the C4 explosive under your wife's Lincoln Navigator 3 years ago." Leo felt the blood drain from his face. The official police report had blamed a rival street gang. His own brutal, relentless investigations had yielded nothing but dead ends and terrified informants who knew nothing. "You're lying," Leo whispered, his hand shaking. Bella reached slowly up to the collar of her shirt and pulled it down slightly, revealing a jagged, horrific burn scar that crept up her collarbone, a scar characteristic of high-heat shrapnel. "My name isn't Bella Hayes," she said, her brown eyes locking onto his with terrifying intensity. "And I wasn't hired to clean your floors, Leo. I was hired by Camilla. 3 weeks before she died." The heavy Glock, 19 inches, Leo's hand, felt suddenly like an anvil. The rain outside intensified, a torrential downpour hammering against the reinforced glass dome of the conservatory, mimicking the violent drumming in his own chest. He stared at the jagged, discolored flesh at the base of the maid's neck. It was unmistakable. It was the brutal, chaotic signature of a military-grade explosive. "Camilla?" Leo choked out the name, the syllables tasting like ash on his tongue. For 3 years, he had sealed his wife's memory in a vault deep within his mind, unable to process the grief. Now, this stranger in a gray uniform was dragging the ghost of his dead wife into the center of the room. "Don't you dare say her name. Camilla didn't know anything about my business. She was a civilian. She was innocent. She was innocent, but she wasn't blind, Leo," Bella said, her voice dropping its deferential tone, replacing it with the hardened edge of an equal. "And my name is Valerie, Valerie Kensington. Prior to wearing an apron and serving you espresso, I spent 6 years as an intelligence contractor for Aegis Defense Services, operating out of their London and Washington bureaus. Camilla reached out to me through a secure intermediary precisely because she knew she couldn't trust anyone inside your organization." Leo's eyes darted between Valerie and his daughter. Lily was huddled near the grand piano, her small hands gripping the mahogany leg, her blind eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Lily, go to the panic room," Leo commanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and panic. "Now." "No," Valerie intervened sharply. "She stays here. The biometric locks on the safe room are wired into the mansion's main mainframe. If Silas Mercer wakes up before we secure the perimeter, he can override the doors and trap her inside like a rat." "Silas is my head of security," Leo roared, taking a step forward. "He took a bullet for me in Palermo 10 years ago. He is godfather to my child. You expect me to believe you? A lying mercenary who infiltrated my home, over him? I expect you to use the brain that built the most powerful syndicate in the Midwest," Valerie countered, her brown eyes blazing with defiance. She didn't flinch from the gun barrel still trained on her chest. 3 years ago, you were bleeding money from your Southside construction rackets. Millions were disappearing through phantom unions. Camilla noticed the discrepancies in your personal offshore accounts, specifically the routing numbers passing through the UBS branch in Geneva. She hired me off the books to audit the family's security and financial architecture because she suspected a leak from within your inner circle. Leo felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. Camilla had a master's degree in forensic accounting from the University of Chicago. He had always kept her isolated from the violent reality of the Chicago outfit, but he had occasionally asked her to look over his legitimate real estate portfolios. Had she seen something he had missed? I spent 3 weeks running shadow surveillance on your capos, Valerie continued, her tone clinical and rapid. I traced the missing funds. They weren't going to the Rossi family, Leo. They were going into a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, a company called Ironwood Holdings. The sole beneficiary of that account is Silas Mercer. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The luxurious conservatory, with its rare orchids and antique Persian rugs, felt like a cage closing in on him. Silas, the man who drank scotch in his study, the man who had personally vetted every piece of armor on Camilla's car. The night of the bombing, Valerie said, her voice softening slightly, haunted by a memory she couldn't erase. I had finally gathered enough proof. I was supposed to meet Camilla at the Chase Bank vault on Dearborn Street to hand over the flash drive with the Cayman documents. I arrived at the estate just as she was buckling Lily into the Lincoln Navigator, but I saw Silas's men lingering near the garage. The posture was wrong. The perimeter was deliberately collapsed. I realized what was happening. Valerie reached up and traced the edge of the scar on her collarbone. I ran toward the car to pull them out. I was 30 feet away when the remote detonator was triggered. The blast threw me into the stone fountain. I woke up 2 weeks later in a private burn unit in Milwaukee, registered under a fake name. By the time I could walk, Camilla was dead, Lily was permanently blinded, and Silas had used the tragedy to consolidate his power, blaming the Rossis and convincing you to wipe out half your rivals in a blind rage. Leo lowered the gun an inch. His mind was a hurricane of conflicting realities. If she was telling the truth, his entire war over the last 3 years had been a puppet show orchestrated by his best friend. "Why didn't you come to me?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Because Silas controlled your access to the outside world," Valerie snapped. "You became a recluse. You fired your old staff and let him bring in his own mercenaries. If I had walked up to the front gate of this estate, Silas would have put a bullet in my head before I reached the intercom. I had to disappear. I spent 2 years fabricating a bulletproof identity as a domestic worker. I hacked the Wellington Domestic Staffing Agency's database, embedded my profile, and waited for a vacancy in your household. I came back to protect the little girl I failed to save 3 years ago." Leo looked at Lily, the small, fragile girl who had just executed a flawless takedown on a trained operative. "You were teaching her to fight. I am teaching her to survive," Valerie corrected him fiercely. "Because the moment Silas realizes he doesn't need you as a figurehead anymore, he will kill you, and he won't leave an heir alive to claim the throne. Lily's blindness makes her vulnerable. I had to give her weapons he wouldn't see coming: spatial awareness, auditory tracking, close quarters grappling." Before Leo could process the magnitude of the revelation, the heavy walkie-talkie clipped to his belt erupted in a burst of static. "Leo," the voice that came through the speaker was groggy, but thick with malice. "It was Silas. I don't know who that bitch in the gray uniform is, but she made a fatal mistake. She didn't use a lethal dose." Leo's blood ran cold. He looked at Valerie. She swore under her breath, a harsh, tactical expletive. "The sedative should have kept him under for an hour," she said, her eyes already scanning the glass dome of the conservatory, assessing choke points. "His metabolism must be hyper-elevated. He's awake, and he knows his cover is blown." "Leo, listen to me." Silas's voice crackled through the radio, accompanied by the metallic sound of assault rifles being racked. "You walk out of that conservatory, put a bullet in the Maid, and hand the girl over to my men. If you do that, I'll let you take a boat out to the lake and vanish. If you don't, well, I've got 10 men with suppressed MP5S who are about to turn that glass house into a slaughterhouse." Leo didn't answer. He slowly unclipped the radio from his belt, dropped it onto the marble floor, and crushed it beneath the heel of his Italian leather shoe. He raised his head, looking at the woman he had dismissed as a quiet, unremarkable servant. "How many rounds do you have?" Leo asked, his voice eerily calm, the Mafia boss fully awakening. Valerie reached behind the small of her back, beneath the fabric of her athletic shirt, and produced a sleek, compact Sig Sauer P 365, 2 magazines, 24 rounds total, plus the training knife. "Take Lily. Get behind the marble planters at the north wall," Leo ordered, ejecting the magazine of his Glock to check his own ammunition before slamming it back home. "When they breach the mahogany doors, I'll draw their fire. You take the flank." Valerie didn't argue. There was no time for ego. She moved with terrifying speed, scooping Lily up in one arm and sprinting toward the massive, waist-high planters that held ancient, thick-trunked bonsai trees. "Papa!" Lily cried out, her small hands reaching toward the empty air. "I'm right here, little bird," Leo said, his voice dropping into a register of deadly, unbreakable resolve. "Cover your ears. The thunder is coming inside." The heavy mahogany doors of the conservatory were blown off their hinges. The concussive force sent splinters rocketing as the muffled thwip-thwip-thwip of suppressed submachine gun fire tore through the air, shattering the vast glass dome above them. Leo dove behind a heavy antique credenza. He counted the muzzle flashes through the haze. 4 men, heavily armored. Silas had trained them too well. "Clear the perimeter!" one of the mercenaries barked. Leo leaned out from cover, his Glock extending, and fired 3 rapid shots. The nearest enforcer dropped heavily to the floor. The remaining 3 instantly redirected their fire, pinning Leo down under a relentless hail of lead. From the shadows of the north wall, Valerie moved. She grabbed a heavy brass watering can and hurled it across the room into a glass terrarium. The loud crash diverted the enforcer's attention just long enough. She slid across the wet floor, coming up beside the second mercenary. With ruthless efficiency, she drove the blunt wooden training knife upward into the unprotected tissue beneath his Kevlar helmet. Snatching his falling MP5 from the air, she pivoted and unleashed a controlled burst into the third man, sending him crashing into a row of orchids. "One left!" Valerie shouted, drawing her Sig Sauer. But the fourth man was nowhere to be seen. The room plunged into a tense silence, broken only by rain hitting the marble floor. Where was he? Suddenly, a small, trembling voice echoed from behind the marble planters. "Papa," Lily whispered, her voice hauntingly clear. The air changed. "He's standing by the angel statue. I can smell the gun oil." Leo didn't hesitate. He trusted the training Valerie had given his blind daughter. He spun out from cover, aiming directly at the towering marble angel near the east window. The fourth mercenary was creeping around its base, drawing a bead on Valerie's back. Leo pulled the trigger twice. The enforcer slumped forward. "Clear," Valerie breathed, pulling Lily into a tight embrace. But slow, mocking applause echoed from the hallway. Silas Mercer stepped through the ruined doorway in a tailored Brioni suit, holding a massive .44 Magnum pointed directly at Leo. "I underestimated the Maid," Silas sneered, "but it doesn't change the outcome. The police are 10 minutes away. A tragic home invasion. I take over the outfit by morning." Leo stood up slowly, stepping into the open. "You ate at my table, Silas. You carried Camilla's casket. Camilla was a nosy bitch who couldn't leave well enough alone." Silas spat. "I built this empire with you, Leo. I deserved half the take." He never got the chance to pull the trigger. From the shadows, Valerie dropped from the iron trellis above like a predatory bird. She wrapped her legs around Silas's neck in a vicious triangle choke, snapping his gun arm backward with a sickening crunch. The Magnum clattered to the floor. As Silas dropped to his knees gasping, Leo walked forward with the terrifying grace of an executioner. He picked up the heavy Magnum. "Leo, wait, brother," Silas begged. "You aren't my brother," Leo said softly. The gunshot rang out, deafening. Silas collapsed, dead. Leo dropped the gun and fell to his knees, wrapping his arms around his daughter as tears mixed with the rain on his cheeks. Valerie walked over, battered and covered in dust, looking magnificent. "What about you?" Leo asked, looking up at her. "You can't stay here as a maid." A slow, dangerous smile curved on Valerie's lips. "I have no intention of cleaning your floors ever again, Mr. Moretti," she whispered, the promise of a dark romance lingering. "From now on, I'm your partner." Did you see that epic betrayal coming? Valerie went from sweeping floors to sweeping the floor with a Mafia hit squad, and Leo's entire world will never be the same. If you loved this intense mix of Mafia romance, dark secrets, and a fierce heroine who takes no prisoners, smash that like button. Share this story with your friends who love a jaw-dropping plot twist. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, action-packed audio dramas every week.